Hello everyone, my name is Joshua. This is the 40th video on my video journal series. I can't believe we've already made it to 40 already. Today's date is Friday, the 20th of March 2026. And something I wanted to share with you today is my experiences of talking with old people. I love talking with the older generation, just hearing their life stories, what was life like back then, and it especially in regards to interests that I have, such as public transportation. What was the atmosphere of Sydney like back then? Old buildings, stuff that doesn't exist anymore, and I love to hear old people's stories of how they used to catch a tram along the Harbour Bridge in the 50s. I remember one time I was at a bus stop and this old lady was right next to me and she started telling me her life story and how she used to catch a tram to the eastern suburbs, and you know how cheap houses were back then, at least in comparison to now, where she said, I used to remember we used to put a couple of £1,000 deposit back when Australia used the pound system. But back then a house would have costed maybe £10,000, but now it's like 10,000 of anything can't really get you much nowadays, at least in Australian dollars. 10,000 Australian dollars will be enough to buy you a pretty okay, pretty good used car. But now the medium house price in Sydney is well over $1 million. It just shows how much things have changed since the 50s and 60s. But I love just talking to old people about transport. The old tram system, the old buses and trains that don't exist anymore. And to me, these are very valuable experiences that they're sharing with me, because I mostly talk to a lot of silent generation and baby boomers and all those demographics, even some Gen X. My parents, my grandparents, and even whenever I'm in a social group, there'll always be that one old person sitting by themselves, and I just like to strike up conversation with them. Just hearing, you know, how their life story, their life experiences, how they reacted to certain historical events. And to me, those are just some of the most valuable experiences. And it's a shame that I don't record most of them, at least with you know, because over time I do forget these stories that they tell me, unfortunately, and it just leaves gaps within my knowledge. So I'm thinking of maybe someday just doing a project where I just interview a bunch of old people and just with their permission, obviously, record down their life stories, because you never know, you might be the last person to ever hear their life story, or perhaps the only person. And once you forget that story, technically it's lost to history. I mean, unless it's recorded, it's lost. And that's what I always found the most interesting: how lost media can be created by, like it can easily be created. Lost media, it just takes I guess one person to forget their granddad telling about stories of, I don't know, a war or a major historical event that they partook in, and then you're the last one to hear that story or remember it, and once you forget it, it's just gone. you know so next time you meet with an elderly person, I'll just say, listen to what they have to say. Remember it. Because they often have the greatest stories to tell, but I feel like a lot of people, we you know dismiss them like, they're going off their head, you know just ignoring them. But I think it should be the complete opposite. We should listen to them, listen to what they have to say, listen to their stories. They've witnessed so much change just happening over the past 80 or so years that they lived out their lives. Just so much has changed, and I love just hearing what their perspectives were of certain things back then. Just seeing how much society and the world around them has changed, and how much public transport has changed, how much you know housing has changed. Back when they used to live in regions such as Cronulla, which was back in the 50s very, I guess, less urbanized than it was today, obviously. But back when in the 50s, Cronulla didn't even have running sewage in most places. They started to use buckets, which is insane to think that what we perceive as a modernized suburb here in Sydney today, back in the 50s, I hear stories about people used to like poop in buckets, in Cronulla and even like in King's Cross back in the 40s and 50s, because um, there wasn't just like running sewage. Maybe not King's Cross, sorry. Maybe like um, suburbs such as like Campbelltown or out west. I think I might have gotten like mixed up in my brain. Sorry. But you never know. Like King's Cross back in the day was very working class suburb. So I would have been. I guess it would have not been surprising if a lot of families were living in poverty back then and couldn't really afford basic sanitation. You know, I know under the Whitlam government in the 70s, he greatly expanded the sewer network here in at least New South Wales, here in Sydney. Because yeah, even up until the 1970s, you still had people pooping in buckets, which is just insane to think anywhere in Sydney now. But that's just to show how much has changed, sanitation wise. Um, and I just love hearing all these old stories um, passed down from generation to generation. I feel like we as young people, we should be tasked with listening to these stories and recording them down, obviously with consent and what I guess the old person feels comfortable to share. But it's part of our duty to archive the past. Because the past, minute by minute, day by day, um, is slowly being erased away. We slowly forget stuff about the past, even at this second. Ever since, like, even right now, when I started recording this video, from the time I've started recording, press that record button, there's certain aspects of the past that have just been forgotten by someone. Like, lost media is basically being created nearly every single day because, we forget stories that were passed down by generation to generation by old people. And that's what I love talking about. That's why I love talking with them so much and just strike out conversation with them because, I remember most of the things that they've told me, but there's some bits that I've forgotten over time, which I feel ashamed because I should really like thoroughly document these sorts of stories. But yeah, I guess to conclude that I just recommend that next time you're in a social gathering or next time you're at your grandparents' place, just listen to the old people. Listen to their stories that they've, you know, been through generation after generation, sometimes older people, they have memories of their grandparents, stretching back all the way to the, 1800s. You never know how far back these memories go. And slowly these memories are being erased away. And I love talking to old people because they really provide, some people might just dismiss it as like conservative boomers, always complaining about young people, but some of them are like really, really nice people and they understand us young people, They understand, some of them understand our struggles. I'm not saying all, but some of them they do. Um, and they just really tell us like pieces of advice, passing down that knowledge and wisdom um, to the younger generation. And I feel like we, our Gen Z cohort, we're really into old stuff, old history, especially where I am from in Sydney. I know a lot of people who romanticize about our old tram network, and the way you can relive some of those memories is, I guess, the way you can, you know, find out about more about history is just talking with old people. Those old people who, when they were my age, used to catch the trams and old buses and trains that don't exist anymore, or see the development of high rises in suburbs such as Parramatta. Because when they were my age, Parramatta was just basically farmland, but now it's bustling CBD. It's practically a city now in its own right. It's just amazing to think what's happened. I mean, good and negative, um, like aspects. There's a lot of good change that's happening in the world, but also a lot of bad change, especially now. But I'm interested to see in the year 2046 when I end this series how much things have changed in not only just Sydney but around the world. Really, I've been thinking about maybe just taking some videos and photos of Sydney, the city areas, and areas where the most development is occurring, such as Parramatta, and just seeing how much they've changed over time. Just to give you an example, I know I'm supposed to be wrapping this up, but when I was born, Parramatta was still like, pretty much just seen as another Sydney suburb. It was always, I guess, kind of colloquially referred to as Sydney's second CBD, but even in the last couple of years, as of recording this in 2026, there's just been so much high rises in Parramatta. It's just amazing to think that even 20 years ago, when I was just, 1 year, like when I was just fresh out of the womb, a suburb like Parramatta in Sydney, just had like a lot of low rises, really not that much economic activity. But now, everything's changed. There's a light rail system in Parramatta, there's all these high rises, all these jobs now. It's just amazing to see how much that suburb has transformed. Where I live, it's still within, I guess, I wouldn't really call it rural part of Sydney. It's not really rural, but it's mostly just suburbs. Nothing much has really changed where I live, but I'm just excited to see where it goes from in 20 years' time. I can notice some small developments happening here and there, but I'm just excited to see how my local community has changed in 20 years when I end this series. Or even, when I'm an old man, when I'm 80 years old, and we're all, living in the Jetsons era. We all have flying cars and, I guess, we have like a space elevator that goes to the moon or something like that. I don't know. Who knows what the future will look like in 20 or even 60 years. But yeah, I'm just excited to see what's going to happen. I'm always someone who's very positive about the future. I just want to see, at least in terms of infrastructure wise, Sydney upgrading its infrastructure, expansion of metro, expansion of light rail, and I'll soon eventually be an old man someday. Just, I remember when we used to catch the old, Carlingford line, which doesn't exist anymore. I actually have never been on the Carlingford line, but, I could say, I remember the old K-sets trains, the trains that were built in the ancient year of 1980, or even like the Bankstown line, I don't think I've ever completed a full trip to Bankstown before, but I was there to witness its closure and its replacement with buses up until the new metro conversion of Bankstown is ready, which is delayed. But yeah, I'm just excited to see, our infrastructure improving. But yeah, anyway, that's why I love talking to old people, and that's why I love public infrastructure. And I guess I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye. Take care.